Order. Before I call the Honourable Member for Hexham to move the motion, I would like to inform members that the Parliamentary Digital Communications team will be conducting secondary filming during today's debate. Order. Joe Morris to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I beg to move that this House has considered school transport in Northumberland, and it's an honour to serve under your chairship. I'm delighted to see members in Westminster Hall today who share my concerns for school transport, not just in my constituency but across the county. I'd like to place on record my thanks to organisations such as Contact, to Adapt North East and to local schools, particularly Queen Elizabeth High School, for their valuable contributions to the debate. The future of school transport is a pressing and increasingly concerning issue affecting my constituents, both parents, students and teachers, in the Hexham constituency and in Northumberland more broadly. Now, I grew up in Hexham. I was fortunate enough to have been educated at the Seal First School, at Hexham Middle and at Queen Elizabeth High School. I am, and always will be, incredibly grateful to my teachers for the valuable education that I received. I particularly want to mention Tony Webster, my former head teacher at QE, who filmed a video supporting me during the general election campaign and for his constant support and mentorship. Meeting with students and teachers across my constituency, from Queen Elizabeth High School to Long Horsley C.A.V. First School to back to the Seal First School where I went a few weeks ago, has provided a valuable insight into the issues affecting our local schools. An issue that's raised again and again and again is the issue of school transport in Northumberland. Now, during my maiden speech, I said that a great state education has the ability to change lives and to lift entire areas. I want every child in the constituency to have access to the kind of education that I was lucky enough to get. That's my motivation in bringing forward this debate today. Ensuring that every child in Northumberland gets the best education is a commitment that I share with honourable friends, the members for Northumberland, as well as those for Blyth, Ashington and Cranley and Killingworth, who can't join us today. Home to school transport is an integral part of our education system in Britain. It ensures no child of compulsory school age is prevented from accessing education by a lack of or the cost of transport. Happily, yes.
The Honourable Gentleman for Hexham for bringing this forward, and he's right to bring up the relation of school transport, especially in rural areas. We should never be depleting the services children rely on to get to school, but instead should be increasing their accessibility. Very quickly, Madam Chair, I had a meeting with my TransLink bus services with the Education Authority, and we were able to sort some of the problems out for rural transport. But does the Honourable Member agree that more needs to be done in terms of bus services, especially in rural areas where transport will already be limited, to ensure kids' educations do not falter as a result of bus service issues? Because that's what could happen.
Joe Morris.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention and for his attendance at the debate. I think he's attended every Westminster Hall that I've spoken in. I completely share his assessment. You know, the provision of appropriate bus routes is really important. It's something that comes up when I have casework, when I'm speaking to families in villages like West Woodburn, where they allegedly have school choice, but the only available routes go to one single school. I will happily, yes.
This really important debate. Now, I recently spoke to a constituent, Sarah, who lives just outside Bruton in my constituency of Glastonbury and Somerton. She told me of her frustration that her daughter cannot catch the school bus, which literally stops at the end of her farm track, and it goes to the local school. Instead, the council insists that she must drive her daughter or get a taxi to a different school that's further away. So does the honourable member agree that our current home-to-school transport legislation is just too rigid? It's stifling local authorities' ability to make common-sense judgments.
I think we all, as constituency MPs, hear the frustrations of parents, teachers and students who are often hit with lateness, who are hit with lateness marks, who are, as you say, who are forced to attend schools that they would rather not attend due to school transport provision. I think it's something that we need to address properly. We need to make sure that we consider all the solutions in the round. And make sure that we are able to provide that great education to every single child possible. I know, looking at my inbox, you know, I look at the 685 bus in Hexham is one that's regularly full, one that's regularly delayed by up to 40 minutes. And therefore, when people are reliant on commercial bus routes to get to school, there becomes that additional barrier to attendance, which I think is really damaging to children, to their educational attainment, to their future prospects, simply because buses can't always be relied on. And I think, I spoke in the rural affairs debate yesterday in the chamber. In rural communities, you pay more, you get less, and too often that's the case. And I think it's passed without challenge, certainly by the previous government and by other governments in the past, that's been allowed to sail through. And I think, when we talk about rural-proofing our policies, it's absolutely essential that we always look at things through the prism of how does this affect some of our most isolated communities. Now, I think after 14 years, to come on, as I've been saying, after 14 years of Conservative austerity and neglect that broke the very foundations of Britain, our education system, and took hope away from our young people, they've been let down, overlooked. And I'm extremely proud of our new Labour government's commitment to increasing funding for schools, to putting our younger people first, and to making sure that every child receives a world-class education. Now, parents want the best for their child's education. They want their children to learn in a safe and secure environment where they can feel part of a community and supported in their educational development. I think no child should be restricted from this due to inaccessibility. I'm very proud to have brought this debate to be a voice for students and parents as we champion school transport in our local community. Unsurprisingly, and as members will not tire of hearing, and particularly the member for Westmoreland will not tire of hearing, I do represent England's largest constituency. I'm delighted to see the silver and bronze medalists in Westminster Hall today. But the rural landscape has a really considerable impact on school transport services. The reality of rural roads mean that despite often relatively short journeys, there are regular instances of children being late for the start of the school day. Children's education is suffering. More transport vehicles and a reassessment of transport routes could make considerable headway in reducing the number of pupils who are late for school. And I've had one constituent raise that delays to school transport has meant that her daughter regularly receives late marks at her school, despite being a 14-minute journey from school and getting selected at 7:45 a.m. Her daughter does not get to school until after 9 a.m. This is a case of students' education suffering due to a lack of adequate school transport services. Now, as the Early Grid for Learning report outlined, missing 15 minutes of school per day equates to 2 minutes absence per year. That's equivalent to missing a total of 55 lessons a year. Being late negatively impacts your education, contributes to a loss of learning. And while we're talking about the provision of school transport by the local authority, this is because the provision of home to school transport, it's only available often through the local authority, along with additional support offered by parents and carers. And across the Hexham constituency and Northumberland County Council area in general, the provision of local bus and train services, and I mentioned the 685 bus there, are unreliable. And they're not regular enough for young people to access their services when travelling to or from school. I've been pleased to see that Kim McGuinness, the Mayor of the North East, has launched a consultation on the North East Local Transport Plan. This local transport plan will cover 5 areas that I know are necessary for my constituents to be able to access a public transport system that's fit for all our communities, not just those in centralised areas. Those are journey planning and customer support, ticketing and fares, the expansion of infrastructure and making it more resilient, enhancing safety, especially for women and girls, improving links between different modes of transport. There's a clear delivery plan that's outlined and established targets for 2040, setting the path for overcoming the current challenges and creating a more efficient and resilient transport network for the future of the North East. This will make considerable headway in helping my constituents, not just accessing education and training opportunities, but work and social opportunities more broadly. Now, the current system on offer in Northumberland is providing inconsistent results for families when they're allocated school transport places. For one of my constituents, who's a resident in the far north of the constituency, contacted me to say that his daughter has obtained a free transport place while his son has not. As a result, he has to drive his son 170 miles a week alongside the bus that carries his daughter to the same school. Now, Chair, I think that's not just illogical, it's vaguely Kafkaesque. Now, that just doesn't only have educational implications and financial and administrative burden on a family that already qualify for those free transport provisions. It has environmental implications as well. I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that we need to support the families of Hexham and across Hexham constituency and across Northumberland, ensuring that the provision of school transport is consistent for siblings within the same family. We can't allow for administration to prevent inconsistent results for those families. Now, often in my constituency, I get questions about school catchment areas. I was on a call with Northumberland County Council on the train down and was informed that one of the school catchment areas in my constituency is larger than the area contained by the M25. So, unsurprisingly, I get quite a lot of incoming casework on this. But for students who are outside catchment areas and are not eligible for school transport services, many require commercial public transport, as I've mentioned, to get to school, which is particularly common for constituencies like mine, like the member for North Northumberland, the member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale. Villages and towns like Hayden Bridge, Barden Mill and Holtwhistle, as well as settlements like Falston, Greenhoff and Kielder, have got considerable numbers of students who travel to Hexham Middle School and Queen Elizabeth High School, which sits in the Tyne Valley at the centre of my constituency. Such villages are deemed to be out of catchment for those schools. The safety of students travelling to and from school in Northumberland should be a priority. Those children should feel safe travelling to school, as much as parents should feel reassured in their child's safety. Now, another of my constituents shared a very deeply concerning story about the 685 bus that I've already mentioned, breaking down on the side of the A69, with children being required to stand on the side of the A69, one of the busy roads running through the constituency, without any police presence or safety measures in place. And I'm sure the Minister is aware of the growing concerns over the A69 in my constituency. Since 2019, there's been 191 crashes on the A69 between Hexham and Carlisle, with 44 being deemed serious by police and 6 people having lost their lives. Now, when I heard about children standing on the side of the A69, I was deeply concerned. They should not be in that position. Now, constituents frequently mention the delays to that service, which impacts children getting to and from school. And despite petitions by parents to change the service from a single to a double-decker bus, and this was raised with the previous Conservative member, no action was taken to resolve the issue. Constituents have been recalling their children, waiting over an hour for the next bus service to collect them due to a lack of space, in addition to delays to the service. Now, we need to work collaboratively with local bus companies and local councils to ensure that the safety of our students is protected as they journey to and from school. I now want to move briefly on to send transport. As I know, the Minister and this government already agree, send needs urgent attention and has been demonstrated by the devastating consequences of the previous government. In Northumberland, at present, there are 407 routes transporting 1,738 pupils and their escort. In 6 years, the number of children in Northumberland requiring EHCP has doubled from 1,679 in 2017 to 3,369 in 2023. The figure is mounting. And the failures of the last government to adequately provide for children with SEND needs is damning indictment of that government and that party. Now, children with educational needs and disabilities often have to travel further to schools, not through choice, but just to get the education that meets their required needs. And my constituency, surgeries are often attended by families who have to travel from the far west of my constituency to the coast of Northumberland, a journey that does not take a small amount of time. And in large rural regions like mine, children need to travel those extremely long distances, and it isolates them from their local communities and friendships, and ultimately undermines the possibility of your local support network. I've had a parent contact me who travels from Berwick Prado to Berwick every day, which is a 3-hour round trip to ensure their child receives the necessary support. I think we need to make sure that parents feel supported as we look to reform the SEND framework. Now, I think when I consider the autumn budget, one of the things that I'm most proud of is the £1 billion uplift in SEND education and the prioritisation for improving SEND education nationally. I'm hopeful for the future of SEND education. I'll always support the Minister and the Government in their commitment to this. I also just want to very quickly acknowledge the work of Kim McGuinness and her her initiative, Kids Go Free, and her commitment to improving public transport services for young people across our region. It offers free transport to children during school holidays, reducing travel costs for those families, promoting sustainable public transport and encouraging families to explore the wonderful region that is the North East. And I'll draw attention to the Westminster Hall debate I've got next week on improving tourism in Northumberland, that I look forward to seeing the Honourable Member for Strangford in. It's a positive step in the right direction for improving transport services in the region. It's through that collaboration and cooperation that we increase prosperity and make a real difference to the lives of young people. I'm sure members here today can agree that every child in Britain deserves an education that is accessible, that is safe. Moreover, every parent should feel safe and secure in the knowledge that their children are receiving this support. Children deserve a safe and sustainable passage to school, to arrive on time and to access an education that's appropriate for their learning requirements. Now, for my constituents in the Hexham constituency and across Northumberland, the issue of school transport is jeopardising that promise. Rural geography, inconsistency in allocating school transport places, problems with catchment areas and journey delays, the very premise of that principle is being jeopardised. I'm very proud that this government is putting students and young people at the heart of the agenda, following the neglect of the previous Conservative government, and I'm sure that members can agree that more can always be done to ensure that our young people are accessing the educational support they need and deserve. Now, providing a clearer guidance for transport provision for children will minimise confusion for local families. More attention being given to the situation around eligibility for SEND children will make considerable difference to many of my constituents across the Hexham constituency. I know the Minister, along with the Secretary of State, is committed to finding long-term solutions for education, for school transport and for SEND education. And I hope the Minister will consider how, in the vast rural communities that make up my constituency, the creation of greater provision for SEND students closer to their homes would minimise transport journeys and would go a long way in dealing with the central issues that we're debating today. Everyone deserves the opportunity to access education, and we can't allow a lack of access to appropriate school transport to jeopardise this. Thank you, Chair.
The question is that this House has considered school transport in Northumberland. David Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm absolutely delighted to speak in this debate alongside my honourable friend from Hexham, and delighted that he's secured it. This issue, the lack of accessible transport options to Northumberland secondary schools in particular, may not be an issue of national attention, but it affects children, young people and parents in North Northumberland much more directly than almost anything else that we discuss here in Parliament. In North Northumberland, my constituency, it's now common in villages like Pegswood that an 11-year-old will be spending up to 2 hours a day on 4 different buses to make the round trip to school and back. When we factor this in with SEND students, as we heard from my honourable friend, parents face a collective nightmare. One constituent recently wrote to me and said the following. I've changed the name here, but she said, "We're currently having issues with school transport for our daughter who is autistic. The Northumberland County Council have rejected our appeal for alternative provision. Sarah is no longer attending school due to a number of issues, the first being transport. We're now homeschooling Sarah." And this issue is repeated over and over again in my mailbox. There are 2 reasons why this issue matters so much, and the first, as I've just highlighted, is the most obvious. The cost and strain on parents is totally antithetical to the ideal of the state school. Families are spending hundreds of pounds a year making sure their child gets to school, worrying the whole time about their safety, as we've heard. Our state school system shouldn't rely on significant private expenditure to meet basic educational needs. In fact, it was designed to do the very opposite. But secondly, the issue of school transport is a pinch point for a wider range of northern, rural inequalities in education and transport, and which deservedly reinforces this idea that places like Northumberland have been left behind and ignored by the powers that be over the years. There are repeated failures across the county in the way that our schools, roads and rail are run, and the issue of school transport exposes all of them. So it's a much bigger issue, this issue of school transport. It points to a much wider range of issues. So how did we get here, Madam Chair? Well, North Northumberland actually, in my view, has too few schools, and in some areas this is leading to huge pressures. The nearest secondary school to Pegswood, the village that I mentioned, is in Ashington, at Ashington High School, which is a 20-minute bus journey away. But Ashington's oversubscribed, so students are instead often being sent to Cramlington. If parents can't drop them off, then there's a range of ways to get to Cramlington, of which the quickest is 41 minutes and involves a train. The season ticket for that train costs £1,120 a year. So most take the cheaper option, a bus journey. Although it's actually 2 bus journeys that take up to an hour and a quarter and will cost you at least £960 a year. According to the very confusing and unhelpful Arriva website, I have to say. So this very afternoon, teenagers in Pegswood who finished school in Cramlington at 3 will only just be getting home after taking 4 buses today on a £1,000 ticket. And this commute is happening in towns all over North Northumberland, from towns and villages like Belford, Wooler, Rothbury and Amble. And we've heard from my honourable friend about the state of some rural roads and how this makes journeys often more challenging. And nowhere, as I've said, is this more visible than with SEND schooling. And I, like my honourable friend, welcome the government's commitment to spend £1 billion more on SEND next year. North Northumberland has 3 SEND schools, and they do a remarkable job supporting the flourishing of young people with more complex needs. But the nearest school might not necessarily be the best option, which can require pupils to spend over an hour in a taxi or a bus. We heard about the journey of an hour and a half in each direction that has to happen in my honourable friend's constituency for some. And parents are increasingly resigned to the notion that having a child with more complex needs will require spending large amounts of money and time travelling to school. The 1944 Education Act, which I'm sure you didn't expect me to bring up on this, which established modern secondary schools, came into being because, and I quote, when poorer children were offered free places, at grammar schools as it was, parents often had to turn them down owing to the extra costs involved. Free State schools were instead set up to cater to all needs and incomes. But it seems to me that my constituents have ended up trapped in a new system that promises equal and free schooling, but includes submerged and unexpected costs that put family finances under strain. So the wider issues, the schools transport issue hasn't emerged in isolation, but it's evidence of a wider series of pressures to public services across the country. First is the education system, which is struggling in some parts of Northumberland in various guises. The town of Berwick, which is in my constituency, is extremely reliant on its one state secondary school for the nurturing, one secondary school for the nurturing of the necessary skills and qualifications for the town's economy. And so when the school struggles, the town struggles. A 2017 report said that Berwick is one of Northumberland's most deprived towns, is a vulnerable economy characterised by poor quality job opportunities, part-time working, low wages and very limited education facilities. North Northumberland's further education is in a poor way too. 16 to 18-year-olds who want to take up a vocational course have to travel for miles out of the constituency and at great expense. Another constituent got in touch with me about this very issue and said this: I've been made aware of a colleague's 16-year-old daughter who undertook an apprenticeship across the border in Scotland in July. She lives in Berwick and was catching a bus to and from work. However, after just a few weeks, border buses removed the morning bus. Emma, whose name I've changed, is now relying on taxis to get her to her apprenticeship in the morning. This is costing her family, who are not in a position to afford this, £150 a week. Emma is a vulnerable young woman who has endured a difficult time at school and yet is thriving in her apprenticeship, but this is now at risk. North Northumberland's GCSE and apprenticeship levels keep pace with the rest of the country, but A-levels and higher education qualifications are behind the England and Wales average. And that will be in part because of the inaccessibility of further education and higher education. But these pressures, I think, are also evidence of a public transport system that isn't up to the job. North Northumberland residents are right to be sceptical of local bus services, considering that Arriva, the largest provider, is owned by an American equity investment fund based in Miami, which is hardly ideal for public service. In fact, from 2017 to 2022, the distance travelled by bus services in Northumberland fell by over a third, one of the highest reductions of any authority in the North East. And it's for that reason, like my honourable friend, that I'm delighted that the Mayor of the North East, Kim McGuinness, has started the processes of bringing buses back under public control, so that ultimately we know that buses go to where they're needed and not just on the routes that make the most money. Having spoke to the Mayor of the North East about this, I know that one of the reasons she's keen to bring this in is because of the positive impact it would have on rural services. Meanwhile, local train services are increasingly sidelined in favour of London to Edinburgh links on the East Coast Main Line that squeeze out stopping services from the timetable. Cost-benefit calculations designed to extract value don't favour rural areas, which need targeted public investment and intentional support. Poor transport is a contributing factor to low rural productivity. So as I bring my remarks to a conclusion, Madam Chair, I think it's important to say, as my honourable friend said, that all of this is the natural end point for 14 years of a real terms education spending freeze with reduced school capital spending, of 14 years of neglect for public transport that let franchising diminish the value of rail travel and bus companies be driven by international investors, of 14 years of letting economic liberalism expose our rural communities to economies of scale that make post offices, banks and other essential services non-viable. It's not by accident that hundreds of school children can't go to a school in their own community. It's the consequence of the policies of the last government. But that work of change has begun locally and nationally. I'm working with Berwick stakeholders to rethink our vision of what an outstanding education system could look like, with a campus model and associated further education facilities having the potential to transform education in a town and even the town itself. I'm fully supportive of the campaign by Senrug to introduce a regular stopping service up the East Coast Main Line that serves local residents and opens up the region to inward investment. And I welcome the £1 billion committed by the government towards local transport, with another £650 million towards transport and buses in towns, villages and rural areas. The difference, Madam Chair, between a Labour and a Conservative government is that when we see communities facing economic disadvantage and inequality, we have no issue putting our money where our mouth is and making sure that where you start in life or where you live doesn't determine the opportunities that you can pursue.
Absolute joy to serve under your guidance this afternoon. I do pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Hexham, who is becoming almost as much as a regular in this place as our recently departed friend, Member for Strangford. And indeed, as he rightly sets out, as far as England's concerned, we're the big three, aren't we? So the three largest constituencies in England. Both of my colleagues representing Northumberland constituencies made really great points, not just on behalf of their constituents in their different constituencies in Northumberland, but also on an issue which is of huge significance across the country, particularly in rural communities, and mine would be included in that. The Honourable Member for Hexham talks about in rural communities, you pay more and you get less. That's absolutely how things sadly are. The Rural Services Network, about a year ago, calculated if you were to create a single region of England, rural England, and compare it to the geographical regions of England, it will be comfortably the poorest of those regions. And whilst very often the depiction of rural life is full of bucolic, ideal, wonderful, high quality of life, and of course they're beautiful places to live and we're proud to live in those places, undoubtedly poverty is real, and the cost of transport and the distance to get to the services that you need is a major driver in that need. As both of my colleagues have set out so far, one of the issues we face in rural communities is with huge catchment areas, the divide between two school catchments could be incredibly blurred. And it may well be the case that you're sending your child to the nearest school and yet it's technically not the one in catchment, and therefore you are left in a situation where you've got to pay a significant amount of money for your child to go to the nearest school. As a member for Hexham rightly pointed out, often you can find that one sibling, one of your children can get a bus to school and the other cannot. That is definitely the case in parts of my constituency as well. This problem is exacerbated by the fact that over the last few decades we've seen a reduction in the number of small village schools. In my constituency I've got at least 3 schools with fewer than 20 children and 3 schools that have closed in the last few years as well. I'll name those 3, the ones that have closed in Ravensdale and Satterthwaite and in Heversham, and of course the communities around those schools are now and have been for a generation in some cases forced to make alternative arrangements. That's largely come about because of the growth of second home ownership, unchecked in many communities in the Lakes and the Dale, which just gobble up the homes available for a full-time permanent population. And without that, where are the children coming from? Where are the affordable houses being built to replace them? Some, but nowhere near enough. And so it's all part of the fabric of rural life that comes under enormous pressure. Your school is at risk and it may go. You lose your bus services, your post office that have been mentioned by the Honourable Member for Northumberland as well. And this patchwork of rural life under such strain is often maintained by, if you've got them, decent public transport links, but so often in rural communities those are lacking. We can have the debate, and we may come back to this in a minute, about £2 and £3 bus fares, and I think it is hugely regrettable that we've seen the government increase that minimum threshold, that cap rather, on bus fares. But as I often say, any kind of bus fare cap is of no use whatsoever if there's no bus for you to use it on in the first place. And so I think it is really important that we look at this issue seriously, and therefore I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for Hexham for bringing this forward. Of course, one reason why you might not send your child to your nearest school is because your child may have special educational needs. Now, they may be formalised, and some figures for you, Mrs Harris. We've seen a 24% increase in the number of those of children travelling to special schools in the last 5 years. We've seen the number of EHCP, educational healthcare plans, increase from 105,000 in 2015 to 230,000 across the country in 2023. The County Council network estimate that up until 2020, or by 2027, there will be a trebling over that period, over a decade, of the number of children, or rather on the need for spending on special needs transport, to a vast total of 1.1 billion. Of course, there are many children who do not have an EHCP because there is an incredible backlog, and people who have special needs but they're not formally assessed as being so. Nevertheless, those children will often go to the schools, their parents will send them to the schools which are more likely or more able to cope with their child and to provide the best quality of education. And if that's not in catchment and you've not got an EHCP, you're paying for that yourself. And so many parents in my communities are struggling as a result. They can't afford to do it, but for the sake of their children, they will do that. Use of taxis over the last 5 years to get children with special educational needs to school has gone up by 36%. And of course, the school or the local authority between them bear the cost of that. Now, it is encouraging to hear the new government talk about special educational needs and try to focus upon this as a crisis to be fixed. The Liberal Democrats believe very strongly that there should be a national body for special educational needs with additional support for local authorities and for schools to fund this. We should not be in a situation where those schools that do the right thing by children with special educational needs are penalised for doing so and end up losing staff as a consequence of paying for the costs of those children that they have rightly taken on and supported. It's worth just bearing in mind, if I could just talk about the communities across the Pennines in Westmoreland and Furness. We have historic spend factors that account for 28% of our high needs allocation and do not reflect the changes in demand at all, and indeed the costs that have occurred in the last 6 years. Historic spend factor means that Westmoreland and Furness is funded 45% less than other high-cost authorities, and the impact is felt by children across our communities. Worth also bearing in mind that with Northumberland and indeed with the county of Cumbria, these are places with very high visitor numbers. And whilst we don't pay for the education of visitors, we do nevertheless pay for lots of other services that visitors use when visiting the Northumberland National Park and the lakes and the Yorkshire Dales. 20 million visitors to Cumbria in the average year, and that costs the local authority, and there is nothing in the funding formula to recognise that in order to make sure that we're not dipping in to money that might otherwise be spent on education in order to prop up other services, because we have all those visitors and don't have the money to pay for them and to support that. It's worth, I think, pointing out, though, when we're talking about school transport, that we pay attention to the plight of young people aged over 16. And deeply concerning to me, and I think particularly to those as representing rural constituencies, that we rightly have young people going into continue their education beyond 16. In fact, that is mandatory, we do not support or fund young people to get to those places of education. And we're not talking about, it's probably quite straightforward in a rural area where you could just maybe walk to your nearest sixth form or what have you. But students at Kendal College are coming from right across Westmorland and North Lancashire, travelling maybe 40, 50 miles in one direction to get there each day. The sixth forms at Queen Catherine School at Kirby Kendal also taking young people from far outside of Kendal. To the Lake School at Troutbeck Bridge, where people are travelling from Grasmere, Ambleside, Windermere and the likes to get there. Dalham taking children from the rest of South Cumbria and North Lancashire. Ullswater Community College, but especially Kirby Stephen and Appleby, two really small sixth forms, wonderful schools where young people are travelling there at great cost to them and their parents. You might find your year 9 brother getting their place to school funded, but you've got to pay, what, £700–800 a year for the privilege. And as a result, young people are choosing not to go in to further education and not taking A-levels and are choosing other routes instead because they simply cannot afford to do so. That's why this issue is so important, and I'm delighted that the member for Hexham has managed to get this debate because it's of great significance to all of us representing rural communities.
Shadow Minister Neil O'Brien.
Oh, thank you, Ms Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairing. And I congratulate the Honourable Member for Hexham for securing this hugely important debate. It really is a really important subject for us to be talking about today. And there's been really, really good contributions from multiple people this afternoon. I should probably declare an interest in Northumberland insofar as it's where I got this. I got married near Rothbury and Wooler, which have already been mentioned in this debate, and I have a great appreciation for it as a county. And if I'm not in one of the two honourable gentlemen in this house of the House constituencies in the summer, I'm normally in the constituency of the honourable member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale either. So they're all places I have a lot of love for. So to recap the story a little bit, last year we announced an extra £500 million of funding for local government for adult and children's social care. Particularly in order to reduce the pressure on other areas of children's services like homes to school, transport, and it was part of our wider strategy for children's social care reform, allocated to things like expanding family help and targeted early intervention, all those kind of things. It was part of a wider settlement for local government last year that was another above inflation settlement. And while local government absolutely did get squeezed in the coalition years where we were clearing up the large deficit after the financial crisis, as the Institute for Fiscal Studies has pointed out, funding per person in 2024-25, that's this year, is set to be 10% higher in real terms per person than in 2019-20, with bigger increases for the most deprived councils. So it is worth recognising that what happened over the last Parliament is not the same as what happened in the period 2010 to 2015, and there were real terms increases per person for local government. And I mention that because, of course, we're looming now for the local government financial settlement for the next year is now looming. We should expect it sometime in the next month, I guess. Perhaps the Minister will tell us when it's coming. And I have a couple of specific questions I hope the Minister will be able to answer this afternoon, which are very relevant to this debate. The first is, what will the total cost to local government be of the national insurance increase announced at the budget? So total cost to local government. What will the cost be to homeschool transport of the national insurance increase be specifically? And third, will local authorities be compensated for those costs? So one of the issues that is recurring about this national insurance increase is who is going to get compensated or not. We know that public services that are not part of the public sector are not included in the protection. So, for example, GPs are up in arms about the bills that they will face, which are enormous. There are similar issues for nurseries who are extremely concerned. For the university sector, they have already learned that the entirety of the increase paid for by the breaking of the tuition fees promise is going to go and pay for the breaking of the promise on national insurance. So one broken promise is paying for another, and all those gains that they thought they were going to get from the tuition fees increase are being entirely wiped out, entirely eaten up by the costs of the national insurance increase. So real terms funding will go down for universities. And so again, those issues apply very much in homeschool transport, a public service that's provided by people outside the public sector. So will the Minister tell us if they're going to be fully compensated for that? I hope she will be able to give us that assurance this afternoon. We've already touched on some of the other wider issues that this issue is situated in. Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale has already mentioned it, but I was really sad to see the end of the Get Around for £2 scheme, which we introduced and then extended to the end of 2024. It's particularly benefited people in rural areas. I know that from my own community, so I'm sad to see it's gone, and effectively a 50% increase in the cost of a lot of people's journeys on buses, which is a real shame because I felt like we were making progress on buses. I was involved in the setting up of the mayoral combined authorities and the 2017 Buses Act, which gives them the power to do more, to introduce the kind of franchising that London's enjoyed for a long time into other areas in the country. And I was like that. I was really, really sad to see the scrapping of the dualling of the A1 through Northumberland. I mean, land and houses had literally already been bought up to allow for the work, which makes it even worse. I was astonished in lots of capital for other things, lots of capital for Ed Miliband's different things he wants to do on net zero, but an overall reduction in the amount going into capital transport spending in the budget, which I was really surprised by. I don't really understand what the logic of that was. Oh, of course.
Thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. And it's a simple question, really. Would he agree with me that the last government had 14 years to dual the A1 and didn't manage to do so?
Neil O'Brien.
The point I would make to him is that we had finally got there. We'd bought the land, bought the houses, and the thing was about to happen. And then somehow the new government has snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, which is desperately sad, but we'll have to agree to disagree on that one, I think. So, we've talked a bit about SEND funding in the round. The high needs block spending grew 70% between 2018-19 and 24-25, so we put a lot more money into it. Now you might say it's still not enough. I totally understand where you're coming from on that front. The demand is exploding upwards, and I know that the Minister will be thinking deeply about the causes of that, what she can do about it, not just meeting the need, but also trying to understand the root causes of it and what we can do to reduce the need for some of these services. But there was a very large increase in that high needs block SEND spending. And a couple of people have already mentioned this really important issue that one of the ways to solve the issue is not to look at the transport, but to look at the schools. And this is a long-term obsession of mine. I had a Westminster Hall debate in here not so long ago about this very issue. And since 1980, the number of small schools has halved. The number of schools that have fewer than 200 pupils has halved from about 11,464 to 5,406 by 2018. That's a long-term trend. And since the year 2000, rural schools, those in villages and hamlets, have been twice as likely to shut. And when they have shut, the typical walk time to the nearest school has been about 52 minutes. So that long-term trend, which has occurred under governments of all three of the main parties, has posed all sorts of challenges that have already been alluded to for rural areas. Now, one of the things we've done to try and arrest that trend is to bring in the lump sum within the national funding formula. It's about 6% of the total funding, which I do think is a hugely important part of the funding, and it sounds like something that I look forward to the honourable members who've taken part in this debate championing, so we can think about how we keep those village and rural schools, which are such an important part of rural communities, going, not just because it makes it life simpler and makes the whole transport issue simpler, because it's simply such an important part of rural communities and such a key part of the heart of these kind of communities. The honourable member for Westmoreland Lonsdale talked about this 36% increase in the growth of taxis, and we do need to think about how we can attack the underlying drivers of some of the causes of these needs as well, and I'm sure that the Minister will be thinking about this. But I end where I started by congratulating in an honest way the honourable member for Hexham for securing this debate. It is hugely important. He made a super important, really good point about siblings being treated differently, which seems like absolute craziness, and is something that I'm sure we all agree is something we want to try and tackle. But there are opportunities for us to address these issues, particularly through the local government funding formula. But we do need to understand the government will stand up in a few weeks' time, give us the numbers for how much local government is getting, but local government will want to know what's happening to our costs. Which of these services that we provide, like homeschool transport, are we going to get compensation on the NI increase for? Because otherwise you don't know whether you're really ahead or really behind.
Minister Catherine Pennell.
Thank you, and it's an honour to serve under you as Chair today. And I congratulate the Honourable Member for Hexham for securing this debate today on this very important subject. And I know he is incredibly passionate about access to education for children in his rural constituency, and I know how hard he works to represent the constituents of Hexham constituency, and particularly the children that deserve access to the best education possible. I am very familiar with the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, having lived there, having also spent most of my holidays there, and having represented parts of the constituency that he now represents for 14 years leading up to this general election. It is a truly beautiful and blessed part of Britain, but I totally understand it is not without its challenges. And he is rightly here today raising them and making sure that he can deliver change for his constituents. The Department's home to school travel policy aims to make sure that no child is prevented from accessing education by a lack of transport. And as my honourable friend will know, local authorities are required to arrange free travel for children of compulsory school age who attend their nearest school and can't walk there because of the distance, whether they have special educational needs, disability or a mobility problem, or because the route isn't safe. And there are additional rights to free travel for low-income households and to help them exercise school choice. But we know that local authorities are struggling to fulfil these duties to provide free travel for all eligible children, and that the cost of doing so has risen sharply in recent years. All local authorities are looking for ways to deliver this service efficiently and cost-effectively. And I know that in 2023, Northumberland County Council conducted a comprehensive review of home-to-school travel, and it made a wide-ranging range of recommendations which are now being implemented. And there are several reasons for the steep increase in the cost of home-to-school travel in recent years. These include fuel price inflation, the shortage of drivers, passenger assistance and transport operators, which have all pushed up costs in the market. But most of the increase can be attributed to challenges within the school system itself that have built up over many years, and specifically the way that the school system currently educates children with additional needs that I know the Honourable Gentleman raised in his speech. More children have education, health and care plans, and more of these children travel long distances to a school that can meet their needs. And as well as their journeys being longer, which in itself is obviously more expensive, it also reduces the opportunity for economies of scale. Fewer children are likely to travel a particular route, and it means that more vehicles are required. We want more children and young people to receive the support they need to thrive in their local mainstream setting, which will reduce the need to travel a long way to access specialist placements. Many mainstream settings already deliver specialist provision locally, including through resource provision and special educational needs units, but there will always be a place in the system for special schools as well, where children with the most complex needs require it. And the department supports local authorities to provide suitable school places for children and young people with SEND through annual high needs capital funding. It can be used to deliver mainstream and special school new places, as well as in specialist settings, and it can be used to improve the accessibility and suitability of existing buildings. And we will be setting out plans for future high needs capital funding in due course. But making sure that more children can be educated in their local community will reduce the pressure on home-to-school travel over time. We want to work with the sector to ensure our approach to SEND reform is planned and delivered with parents, schools, councils and expert staff who we know go above and beyond to support children. But there are no quick fixes. Fixing the SEND system is a key priority for this department, and it's a vital part of our opportunity mission, but it will take time. But we're going to work with the sector as essential and valued partners, ensuring our approach to SEND is fully planned and delivered with parents, schools, councils. Because for many children with SEND, learning to travel independently is an important part of preparing to lead an independent and fulfilling adult life. Independent travel training is a tailored programme to help children with SEND learn to travel independently, for example, by public transport or walking. And I know the Honourable Gentleman for Northumberland also highlighted the length of some of the journeys that children in Northumberland face. But whilst children do face those journeys, local authorities should offer independent travel training to children with SEND who are eligible for free travel to school and who think they could successfully complete the programme. We understand many parents will be anxious about their child's ability to travel independently, And a child themselves may be worried about this. So it's really important that local authorities support families to help them understand the benefits of being able to travel independently and build their confidence. But we are also aware of significant concerns around home-to-school travel for children in temporary accommodation. We understand that when a child has to move to temporary accommodation, for example, as a result of homelessness or fleeing a difficult situation, they will benefit from the continuity of remaining at their current school with familiar teachers and familiar friends, but they might not be eligible for free travel to school. For example, if there are other school places nearer between their school and their temporary accommodation. But local authorities do have a discretionary power to arrange free home-to-school travel for children, even if they're not eligible. And we know there is incredible pressure on local authority home-to-school travel budgets, but we would encourage them to exercise that where children are vulnerable, wherever they can. And in the budget, we announced an additional £233 million for tackling all forms of homelessness, taking the total spending on reducing homelessness to nearly £1 billion in 25 to 26, and that will be directed at supporting people into secure, stable housing and indeed supporting children as well. And we recognise that there are similar pressures on local authorities providing transport support to post-16 students, and the cost and availability of public transport can be a real issue, as the Honourable Gentleman for North Northumberland also pointed out. Nevertheless, it's a responsibility of local authorities to put in place transport arrangements to help young people aged 16 to 19 be able to access education or training, and if they're 19 to 24, to access it if they have special educational needs, and using funds that they have available locally. Most local authorities do offer some form of subsidised transport, and it's combined with the 16 to 19 bursary. It's intended to help and provide financial support to students from the lowest income households. And for example, in the constituency of Hexham, Northumberland County Council do offer free transport to young people from low income backgrounds and those on EHCPs, Education, Health and Care Plans. However, I appreciate the concerns that he has outlined today. But the vast majority of central government funding for home-to-school transport and post-16 transport does go through the local government finance settlement administered by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. We do recognise the challenges local authorities are facing as the demand for their critical services continue to rise. We have listened to voices across the sector and we prioritise local government funding at the budget. We announced £1.3 billion of new grant funding in 2025 to 26 for local government to deliver core services. And together with the local income from council tax and business rates, it will provide a real terms increase in core spending power around 3.2%. And I appreciate the concerns the Shadow Minister raised, but the amounts and how these will be administered will be announced in due course. It's due this month. Okay.
Keen to understand, will local authorities be compensated for not just the direct costs to their own staff of the increased national insurance payments, but also the costs of services they buy in, like homeschool transport? Will that also be fully compensated?
Captain McKinnon.
All of these, the details are being worked through and obviously will be announced in due course. And I appreciate his keenness to have advanced sight of the statement that is coming that will set out all of the detail. In addition, local government in England is expected to receive around £1.1 billion of new funding in 2025-26 through the implementation of the Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging scheme, which you might wonder, what has that got to do with transport? But it will shift the burden for managing household packaging waste from local authorities to producers who supply and import the packaging, which will then create additional revenue for local authorities to channel towards vital services like our public transport. The government is committed to reforming public services and the local government funding system while providing as much certainty as possible. And it's important that we do deliver that reform in partnership with local government, and my ministerial colleagues will be setting out more detail, as I said, shortly. The department routinely collects data on local authorities' expenditure on home-to-school travel, and we understand the increasing financial pressures that they face. However, as things stand, The government has not collected data on the actual travel being arranged, even something as fundamental as the number of pupils receiving free home-to-school travel, or, as the Honourable Gentleman highlighted, the transporting of siblings, and indeed in relation to catchment areas. I'm determined, given the concerns that he has raised and other honourable members, that we improve our data in this area so that local authorities can benchmark themselves against similar authorities, learn from one another, and so that central and local government have the robust evidence to inform decision-making on these issues. So we will be writing to local authorities in the coming days, setting out our plans to ask local authorities to provide data on travel that they arrange for children and young people to get to school and to post-16 providers. It will be voluntary data at first, but I hope that local authorities will see the benefit of this data collection and they will share the requested data that they hold. Because another big issue that we know we must tackle is school absence. And if children are not in school, they cannot benefit from their education. But thanks to the efforts for the sector, there have been more children in school than in 23-24 compared to the previous year, but there are still 1.6 million children still persistently absent, and this is a major challenge. And we know that some children, particularly those with additional needs, face additional barriers to attendance. So we have to work to tackle these issues. We know that schools need to take a support-first approach to make sure that they have an attendance champion and they have an attendance policy and they work with local authorities, and clearly transport to school is a big part of this jigsaw. Public transport clearly has an important role to play. Good local bus services are an essential part of thriving communities, providing access to education and other services. And we know that outside of London, buses were deregulated in 1985. They're now largely run on a commercial basis. My honourable friends pointed out some of the challenges that this can present. The government has pledged to fix this, and the buses bill announced in the King's Speech will put the power over local buses into the hands of local leaders. And I know that the North East Mayor, Kim McGuinness, is working to improve bus routes and has committed to repairing our broken bus system in the North East. So I want to thank my honourable friend again for bringing this matter forward, and thank all those who have made contributions to this debate today. I know it's an issue that many people feel passionately about, and rightly so, because I acknowledge the challenges that far too many families face when seeking to support the right support for their children. And by fixing our broken SEND system, by transforming our education system so that more children can access an inclusive, high-quality education locally, and by fixing our broken transport system, we can truly make this change.
Joe Morris to wind up.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the Minister for her response and thank her ministerial team, the other ministers in her department and the Secretary of State for their continued proactive engagement with me and other rural MPs. I actually think that this is, for the first time, we have a government that truly gets the challenges of rural Britain, aided in no small part by the new Labour intake. But I don't want to finish this with a political point. I want to finish it with the words of some of my constituents. One of my constituents wrote to me to say that she has a daughter who travels from Stocksfield to Prada Community High School, which is a wonderful school that I'm looking forward to visiting. Has to walk currently, the only way to get there would be to walk 2.9 miles along a busy road that would be unsafe. It was one of the many emails that led to me requesting this debate. And finally, a constituent son of mine had to move school due to bullying and sadly doesn't qualify for school transport. These are the reasons that I brought this debate. It's those stories that make up portions of my constituency surgeries that bring me in here every day to fight the corner of my constituents. I hope that people across my constituency feel that we've given voice to their concerns. I hope that those at County Hall who have the power in some of these cases to intervene, to look again at certain cases, are watching and do take notice. It's a privilege to represent the people of the Hexham constituency, whether it is Throckley and Callerton, as was ably represented by my honourable friend for many years, or the Northumberland part of the constituency. And I thank all members from across the House for their contributions, particularly the member for Strangford, who has sent me a wonderful note, and the member for Westminster Lonsdale, who I think paid me a wonderful compliment by comparing me to the member for Strangford. So thank you very much, Chair.
question is that this House has considered school transport in Northumberland. as many of that opinion say aye, of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. The sit-in stands adjourned.